Welcome to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I am your host and producer. My name is James Pagashnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. And on the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. He is a useful human. He is a contributor to The Athletic. He is Arif Hassan. Wait, that cannot be the correct pronunciation. Arif Hassan. Arif, how you doing?
I mean, you had it. You had it, man. You were good.
You sure? Because...
Yeah, really sure. Really very sure.
Because you tweeted something out about the pronunciation of your name, and so I just wanted to just make sure that this is that I'm just trying to. I like by the time this is going to air, you're just going to delete that tweet, and that'll be the end of that. No one will be calling you Arif anymore. It'll be great, except for me, because I know. Welcome to this week's show. I say this week, it's the second episode this week. We are going to be discussing a couple of things, including the Vikings signing a fantastic, incredibly cheap free agent, and we also have to talk about the Seahawks, and we have a special guest with that. He is a contributor at The Athletic. He is Ben Baldwin. But before we get into that, just have a couple things to mention here. If you guys enjoy the show and would like to donate to the show, you can do so in one of two different ways. You can go to patreon.com/NorseCode, and that is more of a monthly subscription. Again, we appreciate any amount you're willing to send to us. $1 a month, $3.50 a month, whatever you guys are willing to give up. We really do appreciate it. Helps keep the show ad-free and all that. The only ads you hear are just the passing mentions of the website that Arif is employed by, The Athletic. Also, if you would like to send something via PayPal, you can do so at paypal.me/NorseCode. Which is also to say the fantasy football the fantasy football draft will be happening shortly. I have alerted all 20 people who have been drawn. We are doing 2 leagues because we had 95 people request to join the league. 90. That's ridiculous.
Nuts. You people are hurt, and you need to seek help.
All of you.
This league is bad.
We've been in it for 3 years straight. We know what we're getting into. You guys are... we appreciate your bravery, but this is a terrible idea. So we have alerted all those who are in the league, including the 4 alternates, just in case we don't get people to click their Yahoo links. So you guys have been warned. This is going on. So we're going to have 2 leagues this year because we just had that many people who were interested in gambling with their soul. So that is closed. That is taken care of. We will be drafting shortly for those people in both leagues. We will be sending emails out just to let you guys know when that will be scheduled. But we will negative 25 points for an extra point miss. It's coming, isn't it? This is.
Yep.
All right, so that will be happening here shortly. So again, thank you guys so much for listening. Thank you guys so much for donating and sharing the show. We are actually going to jump right into this and talk about the Vikings signing, another safety.
Yeah, they signed insanely cheap. So they signed a starting quality safety, George Iloka, who was cut by the Bengals because he was costing them, I want to say, $6 million in cap hit. Now, they couldn't save all of it. There's $1.8 million that was left on his signing bonus that got accelerated. So the way signing bonuses work in the NFL is that it gets prorated over the first 5 years or over the life of the contract, whichever is shorter. And so in terms of the hit that it causes, the player gets to take home the money right away. But in terms of the hit that it causes, it gets spread out. And so he had $600,000 in cap hit from signing bonus for the next 3 years. And so they accelerated a $1.8 million hit. So by cutting him, they saved like $4.4 million. And they really like what they've seen from Jesse Bates III, the safety that they drafted, I think in the second round, who I guess can kind of play his role in that defense. For the past 3 years, he's been pretty good to all right, and he's done some pretty special things. In the show notes, I'll link a Twitter thread from Nicholas J. Olson that demonstrates some of the cool things that he has the capability of doing for the defense. but he's pretty good. Or pretty good to all right. And he, as a starting quality safety, probably should have earned at least $2 million in the open market. Maybe more, but it is pretty late. I imagine if he had signed with, say, the Chargers, who need defensive back help, or a number of other teams that need safety help. I guess the Raiders, they just cut a safety. I think that he could have gotten over $2 million, but he chose to sign the league minimum, and that's important because of league minimum rules. So if you sign someone for the league minimum, you're paying them a certain amount of money based off of how many years they've been in the league. So 10 years, you end up paying them, I think, $1 million, and 2 years, you end up paying them, $500,000. It scales up. But the reason that it kind of exists, it's kind of negotiated in the way it is that the cap hit is only $680,000. And the Vikings also gave him a signing bonus, $90,000. So you put that on top of it, $720,000 cap hit. And then this isn't going to matter as much for the regular season, but when rosters are staffed at the 90-man roster, only the top 51 cap hits count towards the bonus, or towards the salary cap hit that you actually incur against the league. And that is, he bumps down essentially someone else who had a lower cap hit. And so the difference in cap costs, I think it's a $500,000 player. The difference in cap costs is only $200,000. It's basically nothing. Now, by the time the season starts, you don't get that back. You've got 2 more players on contract that end up getting added to your salary cap cost. But because you'll probably end up cutting a player that makes $500,000 or makes above the top 51 somewhere in there, everybody ends up falling under the salary cap in the top 53. Anyway, I don't think any team has ever had a problem where the top 51 fit under the cap hit and then the 53 did not. It doesn't matter. The Vikings have $10 million of cap space, so it doesn't really matter. But in effect, he saves he only costs between $200,000 and $500,000 in cap hit, which is basically nothing in this year's cap environment. So yeah, they got a starting quality safety that they are not going to start, according to Mike Zimmer, and I believe him because Sendejo's been really good. But yeah, it's a really phenomenal signing. I'm really surprised that the Vikings were able to pull it off, and given some of the concerns regarding penalties, and obviously Harrison Smith and Andrew Sendejo haven't been healthy for 100% of the games that they've been in uniform for the Vikings. It's incredible depth. I wouldn't be surprised if he was ahead of Anthony Harris on the safety depth chart already. I wouldn't be surprised if he was behind Harris. I actually do think that Harris right now is a better safety, but I think that Harris has suddenly become, over this past year, a starting quality safety. So it's the deepest probably safety unit in the league, which is a weird thing to think about and say, and also a weird thing specifically for the Vikings. And a lot of people have talked about, and maybe I should just bring it up now, the possibility of moving Andrew Sendejo to linebacker in certain packages, not outright, not make his position switch officially a linebacker, but to play 3 safety sets where he would play in the box a lot more often. And I think that's not a great idea. I think, Mike Zimmer talked about special packages and stuff like that, and the flexibility that it gets you to have someone like George Iloka on your depth chart. And I'm sure that they'll do something with that. But I think it is not as likely that they'll go into dime with a safety as opposed to one of the 8 corners that they have that could go into dime with. I think having Sendejo handle run fits like a linebacker would hurt him a lot, because I don't think he can take on blocks or anything like that. Like a linebacker, he's 206 pounds. There's no Cam Chancellor on the roster where you can say, yeah, take on that offensive lineman. Chancellor can do it, and he's basically the only safety that's ever really done it on a consistent basis. We've seen Harrison Smith do it once or twice. I think we may see big nickel where instead of a slot corner, you have a safety, or if you've got a 2 tight end set, maybe you'll bring out a man-to-man safety like George Iloka, who can man up against tight ends. But I think for the most part, this doesn't change a lot of the Vikings' defensive strategy overall. Also, you don't have to really get him up to speed all that much. He says he already knows 85% of the playbook, or Zimmer says he probably knows 85% of the playbook based off of their history of familiarity. This is a fantastic move for the Vikings. Like, I don't want to say like incredible. Like, I don't think it moves the needle in terms of win percentage like that much, or hopefully it doesn't, because otherwise you've got an injury you're dealing with. But still, it's like really surprising that they've been able to do this.
Yeah, definitely not something that is pulled off very often this late in the preseason.
Yeah, no, for sure.
It's also been said that Iloka was released because of his activism and kind of speaking out. Do you know if there's any truth to that, or if it was just like if there was more of like an attitude concern coming out of Cincinnati?
I would wager to think that the biggest concern was actually just a $6 million cap hit. They were just going to start someone else. But I think I think it makes it easier for them, right? I think that just generally speaking, the NFL has shown like a hostility to athletes who engage in this particular kind of activism. And a bunch of people have different theories as to why. I think everyone kind of knows mostly where I stand on that, and everyone knows where they themselves stand on it. But I do think it makes it easier for them. I'm not going to say that if he had never participated in any political activism, that he would still be on the roster or anything like that. But maybe, they would have attempted to renegotiate or restructure. Instead, they were just like, well, now we can also, kind of resolve this issue too. Maybe it plays a role, but it's also like difficult to pay a backup safety $6 million. So, those are kind of the things that interact with it. It's something to keep in mind. We already saw a couple of people kind of tweet at, either the Vikings directly or people breaking the story, that they're ashamed that, that there's like an anti-Trump guy on the roster now. And it's like, well, I don't know what you think the roster's full of, but I guarantee you he's not the only one.
He just might be the loudest voice in the room for that. But,
right. Because no Vikings have like participated in any, on-field protesting. But yeah.
And now it's time for a little bit of an interview here. As we do with the regular season, we are going to try with the preseason, since the Vikings are going to do kind of a regular season thing. So are we. So we are bringing on a guest to talk about the Seahawks game. So we are going to bring on contributor at The Athletic, Ben Baldwin. Ben, how you doing?
Good. How are you guys doing? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're doing pretty well. I was kind of waiting for James to answer.
Now, why would you want to wait for me to answer, Arif? Why? Why? So we've got a game going on Friday at 7:00, 7:00 Central, rather. So the first thing I want to ask is, obviously there's been a lot of comparisons and a lot of weird connections between the Vikings and the Seahawks over the years, especially the last 10 years. But this year in particular, they both have a glaring hole at offensive line. I guess the question between for the two of you is, which offensive line is more offensive?
It's pretty hard, and this is a battle that has gone on for years. I remember back in 2015, if you're looking at the most pressured quarterbacks, it was Teddy Bridgewater and Russell Wilson all by themselves down at the bottom of all these tables, and it's just for the Seahawks, it never really got better, and maybe even got worse. So I think the Seahawks are pretty competitive in the discussion of worst offensive lines.
Yeah, I would say at the moment it would probably be the Seahawks, but the Vikings are very much flirting with attempting to not just take the title, but take it by storm, having 4 offensive linemen injured for a good chunk of the preseason. Now, 2 of them will come back. I think one of them is already technically back and should be playing in this game, Mike Remmers. And Pat Elflein should be back pretty soon. We've been hearing that for 3 weeks, so I guess, figure that out. And one of the backups, Cornelius Edison, has actually been playing pretty well. Unfortunately, the lone starter remaining, has been playing very poorly, Riley Arif. I think if the Vikings kind of continue this string of injuries, I think they'll just have the worst offensive line, which is like very familiar territory for Vikings fans. One thing that Ben mentions is that, Teddy was the most pressured quarterback in the NFL that year, followed by Russell Wilson, and then followed by like this very generous gap, and then like Phillip Rivers or Andrew Luck or something. One interesting thing to add to that is that in the entirety of PFF's history of data at that point, Teddy Bridgewater was the most pressured quarterback in their like decade history. So it was just so special, I think, to be able to hold that title and then gun for it every year. I would say Seattle has a worse offensive line right now, and will probably start the season with a worse offensive line. I think my question is then, Seattle knows this. They've actually invested more in the offensive line, at least in terms of a draft pick perspective. I guess not as much in free agency, but in terms of draft picks, they've invested more. A couple of first rounders, a bunch of second rounders, I think, with like Ethan Posick and so on. Jermaine Ifedi, I think, was a second rounder.
He was. First rounder. I think he was at the end of the first. Yeah. Justin Britt was a second rounder.
Right.
They traded a second and third for Dwayne Brown.
Right.
Yeah.
So they've invested a lot, right? In fact, I'm looking at this offensive line. So it's on Ourlad, so maybe it'll change. But you've got a second and third in Dwayne Brown, you've got a second in Ethan Posick, you've got a second in Justin Britt, you've got a first in Jermaine Ifedi, you've got a third in Reese Odhiambo, who's not starting, and then you've got DJ Fluker, who exists. Why? Given all of this, and Willie Beavers, of course, there has to be a Vikings connection on this awful offensive line. Why, given all of this investment in the offensive line, is it this poor?
So there's kind of two competing, depressing explanations. So one is, this isn't a factor this season, but maybe Tom Cable really was that bad. And he was, of course, the Seahawks offensive line coach for many, many years. So maybe they invested these resources and they just had such a bad offensive line coach that they couldn't get anything out of it. Another possibility is that they just haven't been good at identifying offensive line talent. I think Exhibit A on this is paying Luke Jokel $8 million in free agency last year. So they gave him that contract. He was very bad last year, just like everyone predicted, and now he's not even on a team anymore. So from a talent evaluation standpoint, that's probably not a great sign. So like you said, the criticism of Seattle's offensive line isn't that they're ignoring it or they're not putting resources into it. It's just that they put a lot of resources into it, and other than Brown and maybe Britt at center, they just haven't panned out. And Ifedi's probably the biggest disappointment, being a first-round pick.
So Britt at center is by far his best position, right? He's played tackle, he's played guard, and he's been not that great at either of them, but he's been a pretty good center. And doesn't that like throw off like, what you could do with Ethan Posick? Because I know they drafted him to be a right tackle, even though he was a center, and now he's like playing guard or something. But like, I assume for him, probably center is the best position too. What's the deal?
I think that's right. Center probably is his best position, and he is being blocked by Britt there. He was, according to PFF grades, he was one of the worst guards in the league last year. A lot of that was just because he wasn't very strong. He was a tall guy without a lot of lower body strength, so he's just getting blown off the ball. And when you're trying to block the Aaron Donalds and Calais Campbells of the world, that just doesn't end well for the team you're on. So the hope there is that he added a bunch of weight over the offseason. Hopefully this will help his strength issues, and hopefully he'll make some sort of leap in year two. But as long as Justin Britt isn't there, he's probably not going to be playing center. And I don't know if they should be super eager to move him to center either, because it's kind of my sense that playing center is much lower difficulty position than the other positions. You have fewer one-on-one blocks. You're more calling out protections and helping whichever guard on either side of you needs help. So if they got rid of Britt and moved Posick to center, they'd have a new hole at guard, so they wouldn't really be solving anything. So they definitely need to get the guard situation figured out, and maybe right tackle too, but I don't think they're quite there yet.
All right, is there any depth on that offensive line? I know George Fant is technically, he's been a starter, so he's a starting left tackle. But, aside from him, they've got a 3rd-round pick invested in Reese Odhiambo. Jamarco Jones was drafted this year. Apparently, he's been looking all right in the preseason. You'd have to, confirm or deny that. J.R. Sweezy is like back, so that's a thing.
So Jones looked really good, and then had a very bad ankle sprain. So
oh wow, okay,
yeah, it was like 11 pass blocking snaps with 0 pressures allowed, and then may or may not come back this year. So that's kind of how it goes. The
sprain is that bad, where you're like, who knows?
Pete Carroll is like the most optimistic person in the world on injuries, and he was talking about how bad it was. So once that happened, Seahawks fans kind of had a panic attack. J.R. Sweezy is probably the other major depth piece. I'm kind of surprised he's not. Well, he's been dealing with injuries for the past, basically since he got there. I think he's finally going to play tomorrow. But I don't think he's a worse player than DJ Fluker. So I was expecting him to push Fluker on the right side, but they just announced today that he's going to be taking snaps at left guard, which is where Posick plays. So I'm not totally sure what the plan is there. Maybe they want to have Posick be a backup, so then they don't have to carry another center on the roster, which they would if it was just Britt and then Posick starting at left guard. So we'll see how that shakes out, and that'll be something interesting to watch. On George Fant, this is the George Fant revenge game. So it was against the Vikings last year that he tore his ACL, and of course the play had nothing to do with the Vikings. It was one of his own linemen falling on his leg. So.
Of course.
In Seahawks Tom Cable fashion. So, and he's actually going to be getting snaps at right tackle, which was just announced I think it was yesterday. So this got everyone very excited because people have been wanting for a really long time for Ifedi to have some sort of competition at right tackle. So the hope is that Fant will provide that now that Jones is going to be out for a while.
That's like a strange kind of optimism, I think, but I think it's conditioned by like the dearth of the position. Fair enough. Okay, let's. We know what the issue with the offensive line is. My next question is: so the Vikings are generally considered a pretty talented defensive line, especially their starters. I would say top 5 defensive line. With that in mind. And knowing that this is the game that the starters play, how long do you reasonably expect Russell Wilson will play, and how long do you think he should play?
So usually the Seahawks keep him into the 3rd quarter in their 3rd preseason game, and earlier today they said that was the plan. So that's what will happen. As far as should, I don't really understand why people like him and Dwayne Brown and all these really experienced guys are even playing. Like the risk for getting injured just seems so much greater than like the little possible advantage that they could gain by practicing.
It's also worth noting that like if a team knows that it's like the only good part of their own team, they tend to end up like resting them. Like the Packers have said they're not going to play anybody like starting for their 3rd preseason game. Like they're just flying out there just to like see the sights. They're not actually going to be starting on the field.
Like
they want nothing to do with Oakland.
Do you want to see Harrison Smith on the field or Stephon Diggs on the field?
I mean, like personally, like yes. But in terms of like, risk reward, yeah, I understand. I don't think Diggs or Smith need more reps to get in line. I do actually want to see Kirk Cousins and Kyle Rudolph on the field because they've developed no understanding of each other. And so I think live reps will actually provide a particular benefit to the two of them. But yeah, I think generally speaking, this understanding of the way the preseason prepares you, it's a little much. I want to see Dalvin Cook on the field. He'll be on the field. It was announced, reported by John Krasinski from The Athletic. But I'm just still very proud of The Athletic. I just keep saying it. Yeah. That I do want to see that. Like just like it was important for Teddy to get out there and get hit a couple of times for the Jets. I think it's important for Dalvin Cook to get reps in the preseason to get back to game speed and stuff like that. So I think there is a benefit to a lot of players, even injury-prone players, to play in the preseason. But I do think that like Russell Wilson is not like one of those players currently. And so it wouldn't make a ton of sense to throw him out there, especially for 3 quarters. But that's how the NFL works. Are you worried, like, more than usual, or like, is this just the normal low level Russell Wilson is going to die worry?
I'm not that worried. He's proven very durable, knock on wood. So it's not really Wilson I'm worried about. It's more like the offensive line. So it feels like that's a more injury prone position. And after losing a starting left tackle during the preseason last year, like I just don't want Dwayne Brown to step on the field until the games actually matter. Like, he's in his 30s. He's really good. There's nothing he needs to prove or show or learn in the preseason. So just keep him healthy. But once you start holding out offensive linemen, then you probably shouldn't have Wilson in there either. So I'm just very nervous about this whole thing. But clearly the team and most of the league disagrees with me. I don't know why the magic number is 3 preseason games for getting your starters reps. Nobody plays their starters in the 4th game. So why is 3 the magic number? Probably just because everyone else does it. But yeah, it's kind of terrifying, especially against the Vikings, because they're really good on defense.
Is Russell Wilson a top 2 quarterback? Chris Sims seems to think so.
That list, there was a lot to take in on there. I would not place Russell Wilson at number 2. I don't really see the argument for him being better than Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady, and Drew Brees, like, as locks. Probably not Matt Ryan, although their supporting cast are so different that it's hard to compare. And then once you're getting down to like Ben Roethlisberger, then maybe the debate starts. But I think 2 is a little bit much.
Wow, Seahawks hater Ben Baldwin on the podcast, everybody. Okay, so there was a long discussion for a couple of years that Russell Wilson was underrated. Are we at the point, and obviously this list is just like kind of one very small data point, so maybe it doesn't even matter. Are we at the point that maybe we've kind of like rubber band snapped back to maybe he's a little overrated, or what are your thoughts on this? Or is he properly rated now?
I think it depends on who you're asking. So,
well, I mean, yeah, obviously, but I mean, like, as a whole, that I didn't mean like obviously like you're an idiot, but like it's like a whole.
I'm here for that too. I think he's probably about properly rated. He was sort of in the MVP conversation last year, and then when the season ended, he either got very few votes or no votes, and I think that was probably fair. People point to his lack of supporting cast, and that's definitely true, but it seems like there's a lot of people who think that saying that a QB has a bad supporting cast is sufficient to say that a QB is actually really good. So like,
right, yeah.
People use this with Andrew Luck all the time. Like, his supporting cast is bad, so therefore he's good. Like, no, it doesn't work like that.
Right, yeah.
It makes it harder, and supporting cast can play a really big role in how people perform. We've seen this with Kirk Cousins and I'm blanking on Case Keenum. Like, supporting cast can make a really big difference, but it's not like the only thing that matters when we're evaluating quarterbacks. I don't think that answered your question at all, but that's where it went.
No, that's fine. That's kind of how this goes anyway. No, this is something that's like pretty important to the way that we discuss quarterbacks in general. So I'm okay having like a small tangent about this. I think that just generally speaking, the way people think, like just humans, not like people are dumb, but like the way humans are wired, I think is that it's very difficult for us to think in terms of like, okay, well, if the supporting cast is bad, that means we should adjust our level of expectation for the type of performance we see expressed like on the field or statistic or whatever. If the supporting cast is bad, then the bar for what would make him a good quarterback lowers, or it changes his style of play, or, you know, whatever. And I think some quarterbacks are more sensitive to supporting casts than others, and that's a different kind of argument too. But for the most part, when we see a quarterback having a good supporting cast, we use that as a way to diminish the quarterback, instead of saying, okay, well, if a supporting cast is better, then the bar should be raised for what we consider to be good. If he was a good quarterback and he had this good supporting cast, what is the level of performance you expect to see? Is it there? And we just don't think like that. And so we think one, therefore the other. And it's so difficult to get out of that frame of mind. And it's so frustrating. And I think this has happened a lot to Russell Wilson, right? Because before he had this great supporting cast, except not like a receiving core, which is how you normally talk about supporting cast, or offensive line, which is how you talk about supporting cast almost 90% of the time. But he had a great running game and a great defense, which is just like, I mean, okay. But that was used to diminish Russell Wilson, and he's putting up 100 plus passer rating games.
Yep. I got into these stupid arguments, and I was talking about Matt Ryan and Aaron Rodgers, and people seem to think Matt Ryan has Julio Jones, and for 2 years out of his decade-long career, he had Kyle Shanahan, so therefore he's not actually that good. But if you were a great quarterback, we would expect him to put up great numbers with a great supporting cast, which is exactly what he's done. So what more does he have to do?
Right. Yeah. And I think we end up getting into this in Hall of Fame debates too. Or greatest of all time debates, Jerry Rice, Randy Moss. That's a very common one. I think Marvin Harrison is one that people should kind of evaluate more critically. If Marvin Harrison, if he were a top 5 receiver of all time, and I honestly, maybe he's not, but he gets to play with Peyton Manning, what would his numbers look like? What would a top 5 receiver of all time look like playing with Peyton Manning? They would probably look a lot like Randy Moss with Tom Brady. And for a lot of his career, they kind of do. So, it's just weird that we're just you can't have 2 good people on a team at once. So one of them has to be bad. Good point.
Yeah, and the Seahawks defense got a lot of this back in their heyday, and I'm sure that happens to the Vikings defense now because there's so many great players on one side of the ball. So how do you actually figure out which ones are actually driving the success? And maybe they're just all really good players. That can happen.
Yeah, I mean historically it has, but I mean okay. Let's talk a little bit about some of the positions that I think outside of Seahawks Twitter, Seahawks blogging, and stuff like that, we don't get to see a bunch of discussion of, or at least a bunch of well-informed discussion of. So let's talk about the receivers, and then we'll talk about the tight ends, I guess. I've got Nick Vannett in 2 of my league, so hopefully, he gets passes. And then we'll talk about this running back mess in a bit. But receivers, so Our Lads has a super weird depth chart where Doug Baldwin's on the bottom, and Brandon Marshall is on the second string or whatever. Why don't you just tell me what I should expect from this receiving core?
So assuming Baldwin's healthy, and the hope is that he's the number 1 guy that we should expect to get targets. They lost a lot of targets between Paul Richardson and Jimmy Graham, didn't really bring in any huge names. So Baldwin's the main guy. After him, there's Tyler Lockett, he's in the 4th year of his rookie contract, was really good his rookie season in 2015. And then the last 2 years was struggled with various injuries. And then last year coming back from an injury where he just didn't have the explosiveness that he had when he was drafted. But he says he's back to 100%. People who have been at training camp can't stop talking about how fast he looks again. So the hope is that he'll be the number 2 receiving option that he was in 2015. And then behind them, it's kind of a big question mark. I think the most likely receiver to step into that is Jaron Brown. He was signed over the offseason from the Cardinals. He had the most targets of his career last year. Hasn't really ever posted great efficiency numbers on a per target basis, but his quarterback play has also been really bad. So that could change with Russell Wilson compared to the mess that the Cardinals have had at quarterback over the last couple of years. So those 3 are the 3 locks to make the team and probably receive some decent amount of targets. After that, it gets really messy. So Brandon Marshall is the big name. Depending on who you talk to, he's either a lock to make the team, and that's why he hasn't really shown much in preseason, or he is on the bubble and has to prove something tomorrow. Pete Carroll's comments kind of implied this today, but not really sure what to make of that. After him, there's Amara Darboh, who was drafted in the 3rd round last year, has done pretty much nothing. So it wouldn't be super surprising if he didn't make the team. If he were able to do something tomorrow, that would probably be big for him. And then the person people have really been talking about lately is David Moore. He had a couple of really nice grabs last week, and
he's a like tryout rookie, right? Like he made it through tryouts, and he's an undrafted free agent. He's from like Eastern Western Michigan College or something like that.
I think so. I think he's not a rookie though. I think he was a rookie. I'm gonna. he might be kind of a surprise candidate to make the team at the end. Let's see. Oh, so NFL draft 2017. Oh, 7th round pick. Yeah.
Oh wow. Right. Look at
that. So he and Chris Carson were the 2 7th round picks in 2017. That could be a pretty nice 7th round haul if David Moore does turn into something.
I mean, he's already exceeded expectations as a 7th rounder by being on a second year 90 man. So, and apparently fighting for a roster spot. So that's great. And then obviously you've got Chris Carson, who we'll talk about in half a second. Okay. So do you think that when the second stringers are out there in the fourth quarter, do you think that these receivers, whoever the second string is, maybe it's Brandon Marshall, and say Amara Darboh, who, he has a ton of like super dedicated, like specific fans. I don't know if you've noticed that. It's a thing that I've noticed outside of Seahawks Twitter.
There's definitely a big contingent for any Michigan player. Just like they have such a huge fan base and reach that there's always some like more intense interest in them. There's also Delano Hill was also drafted in that same draft from the Seahawks, and I've kind of noticed the same thing from him. So I guess it's these big college players.
Oh yeah, no, fair enough. Do you think that they present like a reasonable test for a second string group of corners that includes like Mike Hughes and Terrence Newman and Horace Richardson, who looks like pretty good, but is obviously like kind of not the marquee name among the second string corners?
A lot of it depends on the quarterback play. So the Seahawks drafted Alex Magoo in the 7th round this year. He looked
what? Magoo?
Magoo, yeah. There's a nice piece on him on the Athletic. Shouts to the Athletic today, and so he struggled a lot during training camp. Pete Carroll had some not very good things to say about him, which is extremely rare for Pete Carroll. And then he looked really good in the second preseason game. So if he looks like that again, I could see the offense potentially moving the ball with these receivers and the running backs, which we'll talk about. Although we'll see if the running backs actually can get anything going.
All right. Then let's talk real quickly about these tight ends. I've got Nick Vannett. Vannett? How do I pronounce it?
Vannett, yeah.
Vannett. I've got Nick Vannett as a 4th/5th string tight end in a dynasty league. Was that a good decision?
So he was a 3rd round pick, has done very, very little. But in the past couple of weeks, there's a story that came out saying that in his first couple of seasons, he really struggled with back pain. I don't know what the specific issue was, but he found some new personal trainer, physical therapist, and now feels much better now. Yeah. We can take all this with a grain of salt because everyone's in the best shape of their life in training camp, right? But to the extent that's true, then maybe we can expect something from him. And there's a huge vacated hole left by the 90 or whatever Jimmy Graham targets from last year. The competition is Ed Dickson, who was signed from the Panthers, but he's
fake.
Yeah, he's been injured. I think it's I want to say groin injury. So he hasn't appeared in any preseason games.
I think he's had a groin injury before too. So that's okay. So Ed Dickson is probably off the table. Then you've got blocking tight end Will Dissly, 4th round pick. You've got quarterback Tyrone Swoops.
Yep.
You've got former Viking Kyle Carter.
Yeah, so Swoops is probably a long shot to make the roster. He looked pretty good blocking in the first game, but just hasn't really shown much as a receiving threat. And for blocking tight end, that Will Dissly, that's basically the reason he was drafted. That's his primary role, which it kind of was supposed to be for Vannett either, but turns out that he hasn't been very good at blocking. So hopefully he'll be able to do something else.
Cool. Okay. Yeah, that sounds exciting for you.
Yeah. I don't know how many teams have worse tight end groups than the Seahawks do. Like, nobody talks about it because tight end's not the sexiest position, but the depth chart is just it's pretty ugly.
All right, so I made a mistake. Cool. Let's talk about sort of the interesting conversation. So we've got Chris Carson, who has looked great in the preseason. We know that running back preseason numbers project out forward into the regular season. We've got first round pick analytics superstar Rashad Penny, who I believe has a finger injury.
Yes.
Okay. We've got J.D. McKissick, former wide receiver. We've got C.J. Procise, former the guy. And then Mike Davis, who looked kind of good in San Francisco for a second.
Yeah. Mike Davis is very divisive. There's a lot of people who are pretty high on him, and I just don't see it. His efficiency number is really bad last year, which is true of a lot of people. But if you're saying like it's okay that Mike Davis was inefficient because Eddie Lacy was too, like that's not really the comparison that you want to be defending him with. So
yeah, that's rough.
I think he'll make the roster because of the injury to McKissick. So it was just announced that he had a Jones fracture in his foot, which is pretty bad news. So the prognosis on that is 4 to 6 weeks, but can definitely linger longer. So they're basically just down to the Carson, Penny, Davis, and Procise. So I think those will be the 4 guys, plus Trey Madden at fullback.
Goodness. So what do you think about this this Chris Carson hype?
I'm kind of
okay. Like asking you about running back hype is like weird, but still. But for people who are not familiar, Ben Baldwin apparently is like leading Twitter in anti-running back takes. I feel like you've like leaned into this shtick that you've got, where you're implying things that you don't even like believe, which is that like the running game doesn't matter at all, which is not a thing that your data shows. It just shows that it matters way less than teams treat it, right?
So there was a point where I sort of believed that running didn't matter at all, and if you try to take I'm sure you know all this, but just since we're talking about it, if you try to take yards per carry and correlate it to team wins, then there's basically nothing there. But if you look at something like rushing success rate, then you can find correlations to how well a team does. And you can even use that to get, like if you take 8 games of a season and use data in that game to try to predict how well a team does in the other 8-game sample, then something like rushing success rate does predict how well the team does. So I do believe that rushing matters to some extent, not as much as passing, but the extent to which running backs actually matter relative to the offensive line.
Yeah, I had to be very careful about what I said. Yeah.
That is definitely an open question, I think. So going back to Carson, this is actually a point in favor of the running backs do matter camp, in that Carson had much better numbers than all of Seattle's other running backs last year, albeit in a very, very small sample. His season-ending injury was in the 4th week. So by the eye test and the stats, he looked a lot better than Seattle's other running backs. I think he's the clear-cut number 1 running back right now. And the question is, can he replicate what he did over a small sample over a full season and stay healthy doing it?
And what are your thoughts? I mean, you're just like telling me. What's your opinion? What's your take?
I think he's good. I think it really comes down to health, which is unpredictable. I think if he's healthy, then he'll be decent. Like let's say like middle of the pack in rushing, which for the Seahawks would be a huge upgrade from last year when they were one of like the worst rushing teams in the past decade or so. So I think he's a legitimate upgrade over what they had last year. So if he stays healthy, then their running game will be meaningfully better than last year.
Okay. Rashad Penny, bad pick for whatever reasons. Is he a good running back? And if not, is it because we don't have enough data because he's injured? And how long is he going to be injured? So all of those questions, if you can.
So his injury is not serious. They said if it were an important game, then he could play. It's just like a broken finger that he had surgery for and is now in a splint or something. So that's totally not a concern. Is he a good running back? He was in college, and the things that concern me are that the things he's good at in college don't necessarily translate to the NFL. So he basically ran always from under center and always behind a fullback. And it's just really not the direction that the league is going. So like most teams are better from 31 personnel, not 31 personnel, from 11 personnel with 3 wide receivers on the field, running from shotgun. And that's just not what Penny does. And the Seahawks especially are a team that's really bad at running from these heavier sets. The bad news for Seahawks fans is that's what the team seems to want to be doing. So I'm sure you'll notice during the game tomorrow that the Seahawks they're really going to try to put in a fullback, put in a couple tight ends, and then try to pound it down the other team's throat. And at least so far, it's been largely unsuccessful. But that's the kind of running style that Penny's been coming from. The other concern from college was his pass protection, and he had one basically pass blocking snap in the first game and kind of made a mess of it, and afterwards was doing pass blocking drills, and that's where he broke his finger. So it's kind of a combination of all these things piling up on top of each other. So he could be a good runner, but he's good at the things that aren't really efficient in the NFL. So I just don't know how much he will actually move the needle in terms of how good the team is, which is one reason I'm higher on Carson than Penny.
All right. Okay. I like how depressed you are. This is good podcast fodder.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything I should know about the fullback, or should we just move on?
Let's move on. He's a guy. Yeah.
For a second, you had former Vikings fullback Derek Coleman, who a former Viking. He was in training camp and then cut, and he had a great story. He was the starting fullback for a while, right?
Yeah. He caught a touchdown pass in week 1 of 2014 against the Packers.
Look at that.
Very exciting. Yeah.
Look at that. My boy. Okay. Well, let's talk about the defense. So the defense is not what it was, which is not, I guess, huge news at this point. They have shored up the defense with former Vikings defensive tackles Shamar Stephen and Tom Johnson. Tom Johnson was great, by the way. So hopefully that continues. They've grabbed apparently pushing to start linebacker Shaquem Griffin. Although I don't know how much of that hype is whatever. He looked incredible at the Senior Bowl. Until quarterbacks started throwing directly at where his hand should be, and that created problems. But he has an interception in training camp or something like that, and he looks exciting. And of course, if nothing else, he's going to be a great special teamer. But he's behind some really good linebackers and also Barkevious Mingo. So what is wrong with the Seattle defense? Is it that they don't have enough pass rush, that they've lost, Averill and Bennett? Is it, did it really start secondary out, and now that they've lost literally everybody, that the only good player they have is Shaquille Griffin? Where would you say the problems start? And which things are kind of the progenitors of it, and which things kind of feed into it, right? What are secondary concerns to you?
So I think problem number 1 is going from Earl Thomas and Cam Chancellor to Bradley McDougald and Tedrick Thompson is it's a massive downgrade at safety positions. Especially, well, I guess we don't know for sure that Earl Thomas won't be there, but I'm just kind of operating under the assumption that he won't. And whenever he hasn't been there, Seattle's deep middle pass defense has just taken a huge step back, and those are the worst place to give up. If you allow a pass deep down the field, then you're probably going to get scored on that drive. And both the frequency and efficiency of passes targeting that location was much higher when Thomas wasn't there. So that's the big concern. Maybe he'll come back, and that would definitely make me feel better about this defense. The secondary concern is the getting after the quarterback. So they lost a very large percent of their pressures over the offseason. So Michael Bennett and Sheldon Richardson combined had more than 100 pressures. So just those two I wonder where Sheldon ended up, by the way. So just those two leave a pretty big void. And then they also lost Cliff Averill to retirement. So Bennett and Averill were kind of the mainstay of getting after the passer at the peak of this defense. They're both gone. And then Sheldon Richardson's a really good player in his own right. And after that, now that they're gone, it's basically Frank Clark and a bunch of question marks. They had really high hopes for Deion Jordan, but they don't, which is quite a sentence.
Wow. Yeah.
But he is dealing with an injury, and it's unclear if he'll be back for the start of the season. And then there's just different guys with different levels of question marks. One interesting one is Rasheem Green. So he is the highest pick of the Seahawks draft class that will actually be playing on tomorrow. So he was drafted in the 3rd round from USC. He's young, he's raw. I think he just turned 21, but he's looked really good in the first couple of preseason games, mostly against backups. So it's going to be interesting if they get him in earlier in the game to see if he can do the same thing against the first string offensive line.
So I saw Green when he was coming out. I saw Green as somebody that people projected to outside linebacker, defensive end, and defensive tackle. Why? Well, I mean, like, I know why, but I want you to explain in better words than like my numbers might. But like, why? And do those qualities kind of show up on the field?
Yeah, so he even in college he moved around a lot, and that's continued to happen in the preseason. So he's won both from the edge and then against guards on the inside, and that's like they had with Michael Bennett for a long time. That's something that the Seahawks value, being able to move their pieces around and exploit matchups. And if Green can do that, he's not going to be replacing Michael Bennett in his rookie season, but maybe he can at least replace part of that production.
Okay. And you said he's looked good against backups. A guy I really liked, I was kind of surprised he didn't get drafted, maybe because he's like 5'10", is Poona Ford. And I saw some clips in training camp that he looked kind of good. What's the deal with him?
Yeah, he's looked nothing but good. It sounds like at this point he is a favorite to make the team. A favorite in the, like, it's more likely than not a fan favorite, although I guess both are applicable. But he's looked good. I think he was the Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year last year or something. So It's kind of crazy that he didn't get drafted, but he's looked good so far.
Yeah, I mean, I loved him. He looked great at the Senior Bowl too, which is really how I get most of my knowledge about college players. What is the deal with Barkevious Mingo? And also, I guess Eric Walden plays the same position. Probably not for long.
Yeah, so I think Mingo is he'll probably be the primary guy there. I think he will definitely make the team. He, at least according to the Football Outsiders Almanac, has actually been okay at getting pressure on the quarterback in previous years. I haven't watched him super closely this preseason, so I don't have a good sense of how he's done, and actually I don't have any specific memory of him, which probably isn't a good sign. But at least the way people are talking about him, it seems likely that he'll make the team. Walden, I would be surprised if he made it, but we'll see.
And this is like the same position that Bruce Irvin played?
Yeah, when they actually had somebody like Bruce Irvin who could play the position. In recent years, they really haven't, but that could be Mingo this year. Okay.
Well, let's talk a little bit about sort of the depth. Also, like, how are former Vikings Tom Johnson, Shamar Stephen doing? Do you have a sense?
I think they're... I don't really have a strong sense. I think it's pretty much a lock that they'll make the team, and Johnson's older, so I don't know how much he's actually been on the field, just because I don't know how much he needs to show them, but I would be surprised if they didn't end up making the team.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about the defensive depth. You've got former Patriot Justin Coleman. You've got Nico Thorpe, Delano Hill. I don't know, Mo Alexander. in the backup secondary. The Vikings have a lot of battles for the second and third string kind of receiver core. And obviously I'm missing people, a guy named Mike Tyson, I believe from Cincinnati, but also he's just named Mike Tyson. Isn't that cool? And Akeem King, and a couple of other like interesting names in the secondary. Is there anyone I should watch out for, and anyone that would provide really great evaluation in terms of like opponent to go up against for those second and third string receivers?
I think Trey Flowers is an interesting name. So he was, I'm trying to remember what year or what round he was drafted in. So he was drafted in the 5th round and is a conversion from safety. And his looked okay. So he's one name to keep an eye on just because he's so new. Trying to think of a name at safety. So Delano Hill, the person you mentioned, wow, I got his name wrong both times. That's incredible. I think I have it right. So he was drafted in the 1st round. People were pretty high on him after watching his college tape, and he's had a really hard time getting on the field. And there's been a lot of opportunities. So people thought he would be the Cam Chancellor replacement. So he would come in for Cam, and then Bradley McDougald would play free safety. But it's ended up with Tedrick Thompson starting, and then McDougald at strong safety. So Hill is an interesting player to keep an eye on, just to see if he can actually finally flash in his second season. Those are kind of the two guys that I'm most interested in, other than the starting guys. Nico Thorpe he's been injured off and on. So we'll see if he actually gets snaps, but he would be, if he's in the game, it'd be interesting to see how he does.
Okay. And then let's talk about these linebackers. Shaquem Griffin, real deal, just a good story. I mean, he's super charismatic. I know that. But what's the word on him? So I think he's a lock to make the team. It's not like he was just drafted because of the story. Like he's a legitimate football player. He's really fast. He's flashes all the time on special teams and has done really well, albeit against not other team starters. The question with him is, if he's going to play defense, where he would actually get on the field. So Seattle has two very, very entrenched starters at linebacker with Bobby Wagner and KJ Wright. Most NFL teams don't have a third linebacker on the field very often these days. So base defense isn't really base defense. So if Wagner and Wright are on the field, then there's just not really any room for Griffin to be on the field unless it's like an obvious pass rush situation and he's coming in to rush the passer. But even for that, he's pretty undersized. So right,
it's just like the thing he's really good at, or the thing he was best at probably in college was rushing the passer. But it's such a hard fit in the NFL because of how small he is.
Right, he came in at 225 at the combine, I think, and then that was after he had bulked up a lot. I think he played somewhere close to 210, maybe 218, up to 218 in college. And so that's not really, that's like 30 pounds lighter than like Randy Gregory.
Yeah. His brother's a cornerback. So that kind of tells you the body type.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, I mean, he's super fast, even like the combine time that got changed notwithstanding. And that's a huge asset to have on special teams. Do you think that there's a sub package they would create to find a way to put him on the field? Maybe take a defensive lineman off instead of taking a linebacker off or something along those lines?
Maybe if it was like 3rd and long, they could do that, depending on how the other pass rushers shake out. There's so many question marks there that it's hard to know like who's actually going to end up hitting. But on the other hand, they've talked about fitting in guys in unique roles in sub packages and things in past years, and it just kind of never happens. They talked about, I think it was last year, they talked about bringing in Brandon Browner and then trying to fit him on the field in these special roles, and then in the end they just kind of gave up and didn't even keep him on the team. I think Griffin will be on the team, but I'm not, at least in the first year, I'm kind of skeptical about how many defensive snaps he'll see if the starting linebackers stay healthy.
And is he the primary backup if the starting linebackers get injured? Are there other backups that that could take that role? I mean, it looks like it's like him, a free agent, a trade target, and 2 undrafted free agents.
Yeah, there's not a lot behind them. I don't know if can Mingo play weak side linebacker. I don't really.
Probably not.
Really, yeah. So there's not a whole lot of options, which is like now that you think about it, kind of scary because like if Wagner or Wright go down, then that's going to be a huge step down. But hopefully that won't happen.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, hopefully. Can you tell me a little bit more about, is there anything else like, oh yeah, actually let's talk about the other Dixon, the good one, Michael Dixon.
Oh
yeah. So he killed John Ryan, which is very sad.
Yep.
But also he's the greatest punter in history.
Dixon. Yeah. He is.
Sorry. Yeah. I meant
that's right.
Dixon,
yeah.
Not Ryan.
Yeah. John Ryan's probably the greatest punter in Seahawks history, at least until the season starts, when Dixon will be. It's wild how excited people are about this guy. Like there's Seahawks Twitter has people with stopwatches tracking hang time on his punts. Like it's the craziest thing. And maybe this is reflective of how little else there is to be excited about for this season, but people are really like, his punts go far. They hang in the air a long time. He can do like weird spin things that make the returners drop the ball. So you never really want your team to be punting, but if they are going to punt, then at least it's interesting.
Right, like it's an unusual distinction to be able to generate so many like expected points as a punter, because it says something about the team too.
Yep.
But yeah, so was John Ryan falling off, or did they just in the 5th round they were just like, hey man, there's not many times you can get a generational talent in the 5th round. We just gotta. Like what's the story there?
I think it's probably a combination of both. So Ryan was getting up there in years and probably not any better than a league average punter and costing, I think they saved maybe $1 million against the cap this year by cutting him. So it was going to have to happen at some point, and now they have 4 years of very, very cost-controlled, highly effective punting. So, yeah, everyone made fun of the Seahawks for trading up for a punter, but I don't hate it. I think it's okay.
Don't hate it. Think it's okay. All right, excellent. And Seabass, that's weird. Not that like Blair Walsh wasn't also like very weird, but do you think the Seahawks made the right decision there? No,
I'm not. So okay. I was actually okay with them bringing in Walsh, and I'm less okay with Seabass.
Here, I was going to ask, like, which if he had been like tossed into one of the fires out there in out on the West Coast, if you had just like disposed of Blair Walsh.
So Blair Walsh, I definitely talked myself into that one. So the logic was field goal kicker effectiveness is pretty random from year to year. So if you take somebody after a bad year, then chances are it's going to bounce back and be fine. That didn't happen last year with Blair Walsh, unfortunately. Do
you think yips are real? Can you get the yips?
It's a really good question. I've been very skeptical for a very long time, and now I kind of think they might be.
That's kind of what Blair Walsh did to me too, man.
And
I was always like, but Mason Crosby, they can't be real. Look at Mason Crosby. Yeah, I don't know, man. They might be real.
Between that and then, I don't know how closely you guys follow basketball, but Markelle Fultz, like watching him shoot with his, like all that stuff that went on last year, I kind of think there's something to that. Like if you're just so far in your own head that you just can't like stop thinking about it, and you can't just like let your body take over and take control, then maybe it really does inhibit performance. So yeah. So on to Seabass.
Let's talk about Seabass. Yeah.
So he's really old and coming off a back injury, which seems like two pretty big red flags. And he wasn't like that amazing in recent years anyway, I don't think. So I don't like, maybe there's nobody better that they could find, but I'm not super excited about watching him this year.
Considering the way that the wind blows for trade from or just picking up players, I'm just saying Kai Forbath is available.
Oh, no.
That might be better.
If you're that in love with former Vikings kickers, I'm just saying he's available.
I mean, the reason that he's available has not a ton to do with how bad he was. Like, he's like a league average kicker who just happened to miss like 3 more extra points than normal. It's not. I mean, they found a generational talent in the 5th round. How can you say no?
Exactly.
Yeah. So they had competition for Seabass and just cut him this week. So Seabass is basically the guy now. So I guess we're going to live with it and see what happens.
Okay, well, good luck. Anything else we should know about? Oh, actually, I do. I have another question. Schotty, Brian Schottenheimer. How upset are you?
And is this like the most negative that you've had someone be a guest on?
Oh
covering
God,
their own team on a podcast?
No. We had
absolutely not.
We had Uncle. I was gonna say we had Uncle
had
Chaps on at one point.
Yeah, we had Uncle Chaps on 2 years ago before the Jaguars could do anything with their talent. We
That was
also
amazing.
had like Justice Mosqueda on, even though the Packers at the time were like 9-4 or something. And he was like, yeah, this team sucks. So, yeah, don't worry about it.
I think I listened to that, actually. Yeah, you and Justice ribbing each other about Packers and Vikings actually really entertaining. So makes for great listening.
I'll keep that. Maybe I will invite him back onto the show at some point. I've banned him from the show the past year and a half.
No, it makes for good content. It really does.
All right.
Oh God, here it comes.
All right, so Shotty, are we super upset? Or are we wait and see? What's the deal?
I think super upset is probably pretty fair. Because the really sad thing about it is Russell Wilson is basically 30 years old. He's right in his prime. He offers you, like, you could build so many different offenses around him. Like, you have this guy who is an incredible athletic talent. He can move around. He can stress defenses in all these different ways. And Brian Schottenheimer just wants to line up in I formation, put some tight ends on the field, and like just run it down the other team's throat. And it just seems like such a bad fit for what Russell Wilson can do. I think a lot of Seahawks fans were hoping that they would take someone from the college game who was known for like innovation and these kind of spread concepts that make life easier for a quarterback and really help if you have a mobile quarterback. And Brian Schottenheimer just doesn't have any track record of doing that or even coordinating an above average offense. Now, the caveat is that he's had a bunch of bad quarterbacks to work with for the most part. So maybe he's a secret genius and just needs access to a top quarterback to unlock it. But I'd be pretty surprised if he were better than Darrell Bevell was.
So when you get into that situation where you've got an offensive coordinator who's just had a history of poor offenses, but also a history of poor talent, the next question usually is, well, has he at least made that talent look better? I don't know the answer to that question, but I assume someone in Seahawks Twitter has asked and answered that question. Yeah.
So I remember Kevin Pelt on his podcast looked at this, the performance of offenses before and after Schottenheimer was there. And this was in like January when he was hired. So this was a long time ago, but I think they got like moderately better, which you would kind of expect anyway, because if a team's firing their offensive coordinator, right, you would expect them just to bounce back by regression.
Yeah, there's like regression. Yeah.
So that's not super encouraging, but even if he like got marginally better performance out of bad teams, like if you're an NFL franchise and you have a franchise quarterback, there's so many candidates you could choose from. So why not take somebody who has actually coached a good offense, even if they did have good talent at their disposal?
Who should they have hired?
So I don't follow college close enough to actually know, but Scott Frost was a name that I saw a lot. I can't weigh in on if that'd be a good idea or not. But
Norv Turner was available for a little while, and now he's tormenting. Now he's tormenting Panthers fans.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
He got reunited with Matt Khalil.
His biggest hope and dream.
Okay, yeah. So, fair enough. You don't follow college that much, so you can't really come up with it. What about the Jets offensive coordinator that everyone was super happy about, and then he got fired, and now the guy that apparently was actually calling the plays is the offensive coordinator? I don't know what the story is there, but everyone was like super into, what is his name, Johnny Morton? What were your thoughts?
That's right. Yeah, it was him, and also the guy who ended up getting hired to coach the Colts. Frank Reich, is that his name?
Yeah.
Those are the two guys that Seahawks Twitter was really like, they wanted one of those two guys. And I think that would have been interesting, especially Reich after learning from Peterson, who's very willing to adapt.
You mean learning from John DeFilippo? Yeah.
Yeah. Fair. Yeah. But yeah, just like being in an organization that shows willingness to steal ideas and concepts from other places. Like, they were very flexible in what they did, and it's hard to know how to divide that credit, but it would be something that would have been nice to bring into the Seahawks, where they, I think as an organization, are pretty conservative, because Pete Carroll thinks there's one way to do things, so that's the way they do things.
It's so weird, right? Like, the Seahawks, when they started storming the league in 2012 and then, won in 2013, the things that kind of separated them was that they were first movers. They had like first mover advantage on big cornerbacks, on the cover 3 defense, on this elephant position, was turned into like Leo, was turned into is the Bruce Irvin position, the bear fronts. All sorts of innovation, kind of, or at least new stuff. Maybe innovation's the wrong word now that we've got the benefit of hindsight. But all this new stuff about how to organize a defensive line, grabbing Michael Bennett for insanely like cheap, signing Cliff Averill, getting big corners like from the CFL in the 5th round, and then putting them in a system perfect for them in a cover 3, kind of before cover 3 became a standard defense that people had more things to do with, getting, your centerpiece safety to help run the system. That seems to be what characterized the Seahawks, at least defensively, which is where Pete Carroll has had a heavy hand. Offensively, they've just bring in a couple of different offensive coordinators, and sometimes it seems to work out and sometimes it doesn't. But does it feel weird that the Seahawks this whole time were actually just like a very sort of stagnant and regressive organization, and even like the seeming emphasis on spark seemed kind of new and exciting, and now it's just like, can you get like good players instead of athletic ones? Like, what's the deal?
Yeah, so I think this is a really interesting conversation. Like, how do you constantly keep a competitive edge? So I think a lot of what Carroll introduced was innovative to the league at the time. But it was stuff that Carroll himself had like developed over the decades.
Right, like it wasn't innovative to Carroll, apparently.
Yeah. But if he had all these ideas, and many of them were good ideas, and as a result were adapted from everyone else. But once you come in and all your good ideas are stolen, then like, what does that leave you, right? So I think the competitive edge is not having your own ideas, because like, it's really hard to think of great ideas over and over and over again. The real edge is like being willing to shamelessly steal everybody else's ideas. And I think that's where the Seahawks are coming up short. Once their ideas are taken by everyone else, then they're not really, there's nothing that sets them apart from other teams anymore. And they don't have Russell Wilson on a rookie contract anymore.
Right. Do you think that means that teams that seem a lot more old school, say, for example, the Vikings under Mike Zimmer, who is one of the older head coaches in the league and one of the older new hire head coaches back in 2014. Do you think teams that are like seemingly more conservative, and Mike Zimmer wants to like run the ball and all that, but also in kind of an old school football style, like in the tradition of Paul Brown, like relentlessly steal, do you think those teams ultimately, because they feel maybe more adaptable, ultimately accomplish the goals of innovation better than innovators who have innovated a couple of things, bring them to the NFL, and then they can only come up with like a couple new ideas every year, which is the rate that they had at the old, before the NFL, but implemented them all at once, like Chip Kelly or Pete Carroll?
Yeah. And Chip Kelly's another great example of this. Like, it's just, Chip Kelly is a great illustration for this. He had a lot of ideas that were very innovative. He came to the NFL and was pretty successful for a year and a half, and then once everyone has had time to digest your brilliant ideas, then you can't just come up with another new idea at the drop of a hat. So it's really challenging. And I think the Vikings are, at least from that Ringer piece, they're an example of an organization that is willing to look outside of what else is out there, and it looks like they have staff in place to digest the new data that the NFL are releasing, and that's probably going to be a source of an advantage over teams that aren't doing stuff like that, like presumably the Seahawks.
Fair enough. All right, so this was a really great chat. I was glad that we were able to chat about a couple of things just outside of the purview of the Seahawks. I was glad we were able to get familiar with the Seahawks, before the game started. And it was wonderful having you on, man. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me. It's nice to actually talk to you after seeing you on the internet for a few years. So yeah, it was fun.
Yeah, and we're that kind of coworkers now too. So
yeah,
all right.
And now he knows the proper pronunciation of your name.
Oh, Jesus, James.
I do.
Thanks for coming on. Really appreciate it. That was really awesome. Ben's a really great guest for that. That was very self-deprecating, but very useful, I think.
Yeah, Ben's got to have more confidence, I think. Yeah, that was fun, and I'm glad we were able to talk about everything we were able to talk about, not just the Seahawks.
Yeah. Let's start off with the mailbag. Kyle Slaby asks, you have to choose one team's starting offensive line from tomorrow night to be your line for the rest of the season, assuming that Elfline won't come back. Who do you got?
I should have researched this question. What is Big V starting in Philadelphia? I might pick them if he's not. Dallas is having problems. It would have been easy to just pick them. But I think they've got injury concerns. I'll still pick Dallas. It's just easy.
There's just something about the way they're bred down there. It'll be fine.
Yeah.
Also, Don from Ohio is hired on to The Athletic as the Kyle Sloter beat reporter. How does Arif react to his new coworker? Do you let him stay at your place when he comes up for games with a press pass?
Absolutely not.
Do you let him park the RV in your driveway?
I don't have a driveway.
Oh, sorry.
In your parking.
Do you have a parking spot?
Nope. So yeah, good luck.
There you go. Next question from Matt. With the Vikings playing the Seahawks in the regular season, are you okay with super vanilla offense and defense this week, even if it looks quote unquote bad, or would you rather they do some things that look good on offense and defense?
I think the problem with this question is that it treats it as kind of a binary that if the offense looks bad and they played vanilla, it's because they played vanilla. If the offense looks good and they played as if it were a real game, it's because they played as if it were a real game. I don't think that's the case, especially because you'd be executing against more basic defenses too. Now, if it was a vanilla offense that you're not, that interested in kind of gaming a call versus a defense that is, complex and designed to attack the specifics of your offense and is attempting to call a game, then there may be something there, but it's not determinative. Still, if you cannot execute basic offensive concepts, I don't think that the added element of strategic considerations improves the offense all that much. Now, it does improve it, right? But I don't think it improves it as much as some people are kind of making it out to seem. Not that the person asking the question is specifically making it out to seem that way. I think if you just can't execute that, then that's a problem and a concern going forward. Otherwise, it would not be useful for teams to evaluate players. Think about it that way, that teams are using the preseason to A, get their players ready, and B, evaluate the players at the bottom of the roster. And if you're going to ask them to do stuff that they're never going to do stuff during the regular season, or do stuff that's not translatable into the regular season, then you're not evaluating them. And also, I think you're doing a pretty poor job of preparing them. But because this stuff does translate into the kind of skill sets that you should see into the regular season, then yes, it is from a team's perspective, which is the perspective that goes into making this decision, it makes sense for them to do things the way they do. So I don't think that the question as it's worded makes a ton of sense. I guess if I had a preference, I guess I would rather they, have a vanilla offense so they can't be scouted, and they look bad in the preseason, I guess. But I don't think that's kind of the nature of causality there.
Right. Luke Braun asks, who has the most to lose by just cratering on Friday? And who has the most to gain with the game of their life?
So obviously the third running back position, Rock Thomas, Mike Boone, if one of them kind of craters, it kind of settles that. And we'll talk about Latavius Murray in another question. I think, the cornerback spots that are available, I think Holton Hill has to demonstrate that he can play special teams. He's looked bad in 2 games in coverage on special teams, and that's going to be really critical to this bottom of the roster cornerback spots. Horace Richardson's looked better, for example, and he's competing for that spot. So, that's something to kind of consider. As a starter, Mackenzie Alexander has to prove that he can continue to play at a high level. Otherwise, he's going to lose his spot to Mike Hughes. And he may do that anyway. Mike Hughes, the opposite of that, right? He has to look good in order to take the spot and become the starter. So, those are all, kind of worth bringing up. I don't know if Tayshaun Bauer is healthy and active. I am under the impression that maybe he's not. I'm sure I'll be corrected by the time the game starts. But if he is healthy, it'd be good for him to compete for that 4th or 5th defensive end spot. And the same is true of Stephen Weatherly. We'll see kind of a Fadi who is making a position switch continue to prove himself, because I think there's not a ton of roster pressure from below, but with Jalen Holmes there's some. So those are people that, they've got a lot kind of riding on them. Unfortunately, because it's the 3rd preseason game, we're not going to see a ton of them except for the Mac Alexander, Mike Hughes thing. And then, also the wide receiver battle, which we may see some rotation in. Kendall Wright has to prove that, he's worth the $800,000 I think the Vikings are paying him. Tavares King has to prove it. And Chad Beebe has to continue a show of excellence because he started with a really rough training camp. Brandon Zylstra, I think, will be healthy, and he should prove that he can perform after an injury as well as before the injury. So all of those things, I think, are things to watch for in the game.
Next question from AP, who asks, with all of the O-line challenges, why are we not hearing more about Colby Gossett?
Well, because he hasn't been doing well in camp. He's been the 3rd guard. They've only ever promoted him up to the 2nd string once, and that was when they had just this incredible slate of injuries. And when some of those injuries got resolved, and also they brought in Caleb Johnson, he got pushed back to the 3rd string. He's had an okay preseason against 3rd stringers, but the Vikings haven't seen fit to promote him to the 2nd string. So it's quite a leap to say he should be, in the spot for the guard competition when he's closer to being cut.
Next question is from Zen Cupid, who asks the paradox: how is Matt Khalil simultaneously in the best shape of his life while dealing with lingering injuries?
It kind of depends on what he's selling. I'm not that bad because I'm injured. I'll be better because I'm healthy. And then as soon as some games start, he looks really bad. I guess he's injured again. I don't know.
It's just unfortunate. Alex Goebel asks, how important is Dwayne Brown to Seattle in terms of wins and losses?
Pretty important. I would say I don't think there's anything especially important for him relative to other left tackles. We know that left tackles can be important to winning based off of the evidence that we have, Pro Football Focus studies and all that. I don't know that there's anything unique to him or unique to the Seattle offense that makes him more important than a left tackle typically is, or less important. But yeah, pretty important, especially because he's like the only lineman that they can consistently rely on. I would say center Justin Britt is somebody that could probably be fine with. For a full evaluation of the offensive line, just listen to the interview that we just put in before this.
All right, next question is from Peter Teagland, who asks, how worried should we be that Kirk Cousins is not as good at escaping pressure, or rather as good at escaping it, as Case Keenum was? I'm very worried, and it seems to me that Case would have been a better bet with our current offensive line than Kirk, even though Kirk is clearly the more talented quarterback overall.
I would say not as concerned as you would make it out to be. First, because Case would invite more pressure than Kirk. Kirk Cousins gets rid of the ball a little bit better. So you're just going to see less pressure with similar offensive lines anyway. Second, I don't think that play under pressure is a very sort of sticky, or not sticky, a very wild kind of statistic to track over a couple of seasons. Now, if you've got like 5 years of data, then that's probably kind of who that player is. But even though Cousins is probably worse under pressure and kind of demonstrated a lot of problems with the pressure in the last preseason game, I wouldn't say that you should take the lesser quarterback because they're better under pressure. I think that the way that we should think about pressure is how much worse does pressure make them? And if you're better under pressure, it makes you a little bit worse. And if you're bad under pressure, it makes you a lot worse. And so you're really asking, is Cousins, a guy who 60% of the time won't be pressured and will be a better quarterback than Case Keenum, is the fall off for his pressure going to bring him to a level that's below Case Keenum under pressure? Is that dramatic? And I don't think it is. So I wouldn't worry about it from that perspective. Now, I'll still worry about it because pressure, like I said, makes quarterbacks worse. And if he's pressured 40% of the time instead of 20% of the time, then you're, I think, in a really bad spot. But yeah, I that's not a thing that I would say would be an argument of why the Vikings should have kept Keenum given kind of the state of their offensive line, especially because they didn't know that this would be the state of their offensive line. They thought they had the left tackle spot all sewn up. Now
they might have known.
Well, I mean, but they had Pat Elflein and Mike Remmers and Riley Reef. So they did 3 of the 5, right? And they had to figure out the other 2, and they didn't, right?
Yeah, but if you've seen the 3 Sharknadoes before, you kind of know what the 4th one's going to look like.
I'm just saying they had more players that they could trust than I think, a lot of people are making it out to be. And it just so happens that like all of them are injured, but they're going to come back anyway. So I don't think that that's the way to approach it.
Okay. Brian Jellerson asks, watching the coverage of Adrian Peterson in Washington, is it just me or does he look 30 pounds lighter? I almost think Latavius is bigger now.
Adrian's actually kind of always been not small, but always looked a little light compared to other running backs. And so when you don't watch him for like 2 years and you see him again, it's going to be weird because it's like, oh, he's small. I remember him like destroying dudes.
When he retires, it's going to be really weird to see him just kind of shrink.
Right, yeah. But I mean, he entered the league at like 212 pounds. So he was never a huge. Latavius Murray was always bigger than him. First, Latavius Murray 6'2" and 238 or something like that. Latavius Murray's always been bigger than him, but also a lot of running backs have always been bigger than him. So I don't think he actually is any smaller at Washington. I think he's the same size.
He also, I'll just get this question out of the way real quick. Says, my dad and I have been flying up from Virginia for games since the U.S. Bank opened, but we usually go to the same 3 restaurants. Any suggestions for new places from a couple of locals? We actually went in depth on this in episode 233. It's the Hater 100. Go ahead and take a listen to that. It's one of the last questions in the mailbag. But we went pretty in depth on that, and it's worth checking out. But Paul Hegstead asks, will AP rush for 2,000 yards for the Redskins this year? I just wanted to include that because the amount of optimism in that is truly just like,
I love it. Well, I mean, if the Redskins go 14-2 and they need to salt out games at the end and P. Ryan, his injury is worse than it sounds, and Chris Thompson gets injured again, and all that. Then, okay, cool. Yeah, they're 14-2, and they need to run Adrian Peterson a lot, and he's in the best shape of his life. So I don't see why not.
Yeah, Kenneth Allen asks, how long until AP tears his ACL on that terrible excuse for a field they call FedEx?
Technically, the last time he tore it wasn't because, or I shouldn't say technically, but it probably wasn't because of the field. It was because of a specific player on the field who is not there anymore. At least that's, I think, is the predominant theory, that Dejan Gomez like yanked his knee and that was the problem. But yeah, the field doesn't have a good history, right? Like everyone remembers Robert Griffin III. If you actually track injuries, a knee injury specifically by field, FedEx Field is it's in the average. It's like in the middle. So week 3.
Like, that being said, it's still happening week 3. Just because I'm curious, who ended up at the top of the list, and why is it Soldier Field?
I don't remember anymore. I looked up FedEx Field and I looked up the Vikings. I should have looked at the top and the bottom because that's also super interesting. I want to say Houston ended up at the bottom.
Or is it like the San Diego practice field?
Right. Yeah, right. Yeah, I don't remember. Remember when Jadeveon Clowney hurt himself because the seams of the Houston field had or it was either their practice field or their actual field, but the seams had just tripped him up. So I think that might be. I think that was the winner.
I think that was the same season that Reggie Bush tore his ACL while walking on like the track part of the Rams stadium.
Oh Jesus!
That was
yeah.
That's a hell of a way to end your career right there.
Yeah, I'll link the study that I found to this effect in the show notes.
Excellent. Also, Peter Teaglin asks, can we please hear more stories of how Arif has escaped death while remaining cool, calm, and collected?
I am a baller. I am a survivor.
Arif is a baller.
When I saw this when I saw this question, I was racking my brain for other instances this has definitely happened. I've gotten out of the way of cars instead of freezing up, so that's good. That speaks to my performance under life-threatening pressure. This is my girlfriend agrees that I'm very good under pressure when it's a physical danger. She says that I'm not as great in emotional crises. I believe her.
Seems accurate.
Yeah. When someone is sick, I'm like less like, oh yeah, I know what to do. Let's do this. And I'm more like, boy, I'm just going to stare. But yeah, I'm your man. The order goes, me, the Marines, SEAL Team 6, and then me when I've had my coffee. That's the order.
That makes sense, actually. That works pretty well in your favor, anyway. So that is going to be it for this episode. We will be back next week to discuss the game over with the Seahawks. Hopefully, the Vikings are able to pull this off. So that's going to be it for that. Arif, let's plug something.
Yeah, so I'm going to include my most recent article, and maybe by the time it's only going to be in one article, but the linebacker depth chart and how they've done in training camp and so on. You can find that at theathletic.com. In order to read it, you need to be a subscriber. Until the 27th, you can get access to this promotion that gives you 30% off. Go to theathletic.com/Vikings expansion. Or if it helps you remember a little bit better, theathletic.com/Viking sex pansion, which is how a lot of people on Twitter have been treating it.
That's terrible, Arif.
I mean, that's what they're doing. So I think it's normally like $40 a year. And with this code, 30% off, whatever the math there is. But that's pretty significant. So you can read my work over there.
Cool. Well, that is going to be it for this week. So again, for Arif, my name is for Arif, my name is James. Thank you guys so much for listening. And as Mike Zimmer has said, tweet that, and we will see you next week. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's Vikings blog at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan, and he can be found on Twitter at Arif Hassan NFL. I am your producer and co-host, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can make your one-time donation at paypal.me/NorseCode, or a recurring monthly contribution can be made by visiting patreon.com/NorseCode. Any questions or comments that won't fit in a tweet can also be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, we thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.